Welcome back to the Pursuit Zone podcast. I'm Paul Schmid, and I interview explorers that dream big, break out of their comfort zones, and take on ambitious pursuits. This is episode 205 with Anne-Sophie Rodet. In this episode, we talk about her adventure riding a unicycle through Patagonia. Let's start the show, and let me introduce my guest. Her adventure began in Ushuaia, Argentina in late January 2013. Nearly 7 months later, she cycled into Santiago, Chile after 4,600 kilometers, accomplishing her goal of unicycling through Patagonia. But the goal was more than just a cycling challenge. It was a way to meet people from different cultures and a way to discover herself at the same time. In 2016, she received the Chris Holm Evolution of Balance Award that supports riders seeking creative and self-supported mountain unicycling adventures in remote places. She was granted this along with Kelly Carley for their adventure in the Alps on the Haute Route. You can learn more about Anne-Sophie at her website, AnneSophieRodet.com. Anne-Sophie Rodet, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
Anne-Sophie, how long have you been riding unicycles?
Well, I started when I was about 6 years old. My older brother started this circus activity once a week, and I really, really wanted to do it too. And then I picked the unicycle because at the time I wanted to be a boy. I was a little tomboy, and I thought that the unicycle wasn't one of the girly activities that they had, like tightrope or trapeze seemed girly to me. So I picked the unicycle, and I never stopped.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in France near the Alps until I was 12 years old, and then we moved more south of France when I was 12.
And now you live in Vancouver. How did you end up there?
At one point, when I was in my mid-20s, I was living in Paris. I was tired of Paris. I wanted to improve my English. I was always interested in experimenting, like life in a different country. See what it was like. Learn from a different culture, and in a way, like England seemed too close and too far at the same time. Too far because it would be hard to find a job. Anyway, so I picked Canada. I had no idea it would be hard or easy, and I was lucky as the French person. It's not that at the time it wasn't that hard. And Vancouver, I just realized that they had mountains, but it also wasn't cold. And so that's it. I picked Vancouver, and I didn't think I was going to necessarily stay there. I was going for a year or two, and then I was like, I'll see if I like it or not. And 13 years later, I'm still there.
What is your day job?
Right now, I'm actually on maternity leave. We had a daughter almost a year ago. I do a bit of illustration, and I'll see if I can find something in publishing and graphic design, or, I mean, we'll see what the situation is, how things evolve, because it's not necessarily easy to find something now.
Before you went on this unicycling adventure down in Patagonia, did you have other types of travel? Were you a big traveler? Did you go on like big month-long backpacking trips and things like that?
Not really backpacking trips. I traveled quite a bit, and in the US, in Europe, also in Africa, but more like I would stay in one place, either in a family, or I stayed like in Africa. I stayed both in Burkina Faso and Benin, kind of helping and meeting people on one side, but never really like backpacking. And then I did this one unicycle tour organized by some of my friends, but it was a supported trip in Europe from Slovenia all the way to the south of France. And I really liked it, but I realized that it wasn't exactly the way I wanted to do things, because everything was planned and every stop was organized in advance. And I like the freedom to be able to, if I met someone I liked, to be able to spend as much time I wanted, or to pick a different spot for the night and things like that. So I was more interested in something that was self-supported instead.
Was that what gave you the idea for the Patagonia adventure, or was it something else?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, that was totally the process where it was like, okay, I want to do this, get into this. It didn't look like there was many people doing it with unicycles because it has challenges. But I was looking at cyclists and I thought, I mean, the unicycle shouldn't be that different. We should be able to do something similar. But it was like a bit of a whole thought process and trying to make it happen. It took me a while. I was talking about this thing that one day I'll do. And at one point I would say, okay, I have to do it. Otherwise it's never going to happen and I have to commit. I was telling all my friends, I'll do it. And I felt like by telling them, it was making me accountable. Like I had to do it at some point.
Was it a hard adventure to plan for?
Yeah, it's funny because now that I look back, I'm like, oh, that doesn't seem that hard. But it was a little stressful at first because I didn't have that much experience in reality about camping and everything. When I'd go camping, I'd go with friends. And for example, they had like a stove. I didn't know how to use a stove to cook the food. So there was quite a bit of learning, even though I'd go camping a bunch with my friends. I was missing a bit of, but I spent lots of hours online on forums about how to travel light because I knew that was like a big goal is to really travel light. And over the years, like I was testing a little bit the gear and trying to understand what could work and what could not. And I did few like tiny trips around where I lived with friends and see if it worked, what I could do, like with a backpack and my unicycle, and trying to little by little pick the specific gear I wanted. I really picked every little single piece I took with me. Now that I'm more into this world of people traveling light, I know that everybody does that and it seems obvious. But I think at the time for me, I had no idea, didn't really know anybody who were doing that. So it took me a while to figure out everything. And in terms of my route, I just decided I knew I wanted to go to South America. I could speak Spanish. I wanted to use my Spanish. I like the idea of getting better in Spanish. For me, languages are a way to meet and get to know more culture. And I thought like Spanish would open a whole new world. And so I knew I wanted to go to South America. For us French, UShuaia is like this area, and there was a TV show called UShuaia when we were little that was about discovering new cultures. So for us French people, UShuaia is the specific, like it's a special place. So I knew I wanted to go there. So what I did is I just followed the route of another cyclist who had like described everything about his trip, like where he would find food and exactly what, like he had a blog. And it's like, I'm just going to follow his route. It looks like a great route. He spent a lot of time deciding where he was going. And for me, it was a reassurance that I would be able to find food and water often enough and that it would just make my trip way easier. Because I was worried that on a unicycle, I had other things to deal with, or I knew I couldn't do many kilometers a day, not as much as on a bike. And I couldn't carry as much. And so I just wanted to not to have to worry about that.
Do you remember the name of the blog?
I don't remember it on the top of my head, but it would be a French. He's French. So the whole blog is in French. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your unicycle. How does it differ maybe from a normal unicycle that maybe someone has seen before?
So this is a unicycle that has a bigger wheel because on a unicycle, it's a direct drive. There are unicycles that exist that have a free wheel, but they're really specific and only crazy riders. I mean, already a unicyclist is considered crazy, but some of them are even crazier and use free wheel, but you can't do long distance with them. They're really, so it's a direct drive, but it means also that in terms of gear, it's a problem. Actually, I was using a hub that had 2 gears, but there aren't unicycles out there that have more than 2 gears. And that means you want a bigger wheel, but I didn't want too big of a wheel because for me, I'm a bit short, but also I knew I was going to do terrain that was challenging with a lot of like gravel roads and things like that. And so it'd be even harder to mount on it. So I picked a 29-inch unicycle. Some people that do distance will go with even 30 inches unicycles, but often they do more road than gravel or difficult terrain or wind. So I was really happy with the unicycle I picked, the 29-inch unicycle and the geared hub. And then I actually had it custom made. It was just the occasion. We had a friend who could do that for us, and that meant I had the specific rack, and it was a little bit of a gift to myself to have this unicycle made for me. But it had like a rack integrated to the frame. So my gear would go on top of the rack, not on the sides, because on the sides I have my legs that are pedaling. The unicycle being much, much smaller than a bike means that if you have gear on the sides, that's where your legs are. I mean, there are ways to make it work. Like I know other unicyclists who've done things. Often they're also taller than me. They have a bigger wheel. That's what worked for me anyway.
What are you carrying? You got a tent and like a cooking setup?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it was pretty minimum. Like I had 2 shirts for the whole trip. I didn't have a towel. I was using my fleece jacket was also my towel if I needed. I had just one pair of pants, and I mean I did have rain pants too. So at one point I just used the rain pants that are pants. Yeah, as little as possible, and but also at the same time things I were comfortable with. Going for 6 months, I knew I wanted a tent. I wasn't ready for a tarp or a BV. I wanted to have my little home where at night I'll feel in my own little bubble if needed. And as I said earlier, before that I had never used a stove, so I picked an easy system because I want to make sure that I was going to eat properly every night. I thought if it were too complicated, I was going to skip dinner otherwise. So I was trying to go as light as possible, but at the same time, with a limit, given my knowledge and my experience.
And you have a sleeping bag and a sleeping pad?
Mm-hmm, yes, yes, both of those. But for example, the sleeping pad, I picked one that inflates, but also is like totally flat when you deflate it because they're really light, but also super comfortable. But I picked one that would only go up to my knees because that would be lighter. And I was really trying to go as light as possible. And then I would just use my empty backpack and whatever gear I had left for my legs. I don't need comfort for my legs. I just need them to be a little higher.
Now, does the unicycle have any sort of a handlebar, or how does braking work?
They do, or at least I picked to have handlebars. I mean, originally when you see the ones in the circus, they don't, but more and more the unicycles have evolved for whatever we use them for. And so a lot of unicyclists use the tiny handlebars if they are doing mountain unicycling and longer ones if they're going road unicycling. So I had a pair of handlebars and I had a disc brake. The handlebars I had were not actually strong enough. That's the one piece of gear I got shipped to me during the trip because the handlebars were breaking. Every time the unicycle was falling, it was falling on the handlebars. It was just a little too much force on it, and they were a problem because then they were bent and on the way of my legs. So I got a new pair shipped there. And the brake, I had the disc brake. It was, I think at the time, it was just the beginning of the disc brake being used for unicycle. Before that, people thought it wouldn't work for a unicycle because usually you don't want to brake too strongly on a unicycle because you might end up just going over your unicycle, but you learn to feather your brake and make it work. I wasn't using it a lot. I was still a bit new at using disc brake. I guess I was just so used not to have a brake or at least a disc brake and used to just brake with my legs because it's a fixed gear cycle. Then you can do a lot of the brake with your knees, but if you do it a lot, it damages your knees. So it is a good idea to use the brake for really, really long slopes. I would use the brake.
You have this route that you got from the blog. How did you stay on track and navigate that? Were you using a phone?
No, I wasn't. Part of it is because my original plan was not to bring a phone. I really wanted to be away from technologies, and I was like, I'm gonna have a break from social media and things like that. It ended up not happening. One of the reasons is that I think my boyfriend at the time, who's my husband now, wanted to be able to be in touch with me, and I was like, I'm leaving for 6 months. I can at least do this for him. So in the end, I did bring a phone, but originally I planned not to have a phone. And so I just used a good map I had bought before going on the trip. And so I had really seen on the map exactly where I wanted to go. And down there, it wasn't that hard to find my route. It's just there are not that many roads, and there are signs along the way. And so I didn't have to take my map out all the time. Like I found that the navigation wasn't difficult at all. I would just look at my map maybe 2 or 3 times a day, but that's all.
I think you fly into Ushuaia and you probably take a couple of days to orient yourself and maybe get some supplies. What was it like in Ushuaia? What do you remember about that city?
Yeah, in the end, I didn't spend a lot of time in Ushuaia. I think I was worried that the more time I was going to spend in Ushuaia, the harder it was going to be to start. And so, I mean, I did spend a few days to exactly find the last few pieces, things that I was missing. It was mostly about organizing. Most of the time, I was like at the campground I had picked that was a little bit outside of town, but was a little cheaper. Interestingly enough, I felt that Ushuaia actually looked a bit similar to Vancouver. It reminded me a lot of Vancouver, where I lived and I still live. It was beautiful, but I didn't get to explore it so much. I think I will probably go back to Patagonia at some point, and I'd like to spend a few days in Ushuaia again because I liked it. I mean, it's on the water, and I always like cities that are on the water. It is pretty green, and yeah, I quite enjoyed it.
I read through your website and I just picked out some places there that you had written about and as topics to talk about as you move your way north. The first place is Punta Arenas, where I think your parents maybe visited you during this time, but you took some time off to hike Torres del Paine. What do you remember about that? How was the hiking?
It was beautiful. I really liked it. The park is pretty expensive to go to. I don't know what I would have done without my parents around. They invited me, so that was nice. And we didn't have a lot of time, so we didn't do like a big circuit. And they didn't really have gear with them, even though they like hiking there. I think they would camp. They like it, but they didn't really have anything with them on the trip. They were using this excuse to go to South America too and visit a number of places, and so we met in that area.
You move up into Los Glaciares National Park with that's famous for its glaciers. What do you remember about this part?
This is, I'd say, my favorite area of the whole trip. I loved it, and people who live there really love the outdoors. Not necessarily the way I experience it, as in hiking, and some of them do. Some of them that's just where they live, but they just really like to be outside. They can be gauchos that I met in there. So the gauchos are I guess, the cowboys of South America, and that their way of life. I met this woman who also decided to live in El Chalten, and she just loves meeting people that are into mountain sports and cycling, and so she welcomed them to her place. And she can't necessarily travel the way people from other countries do, but she just loves people, meeting people who travel, and hearing from their stories, and from that she's it just makes her happy. So this is like just like a such a beautiful area. I stopped quite a bit there. I mean, my trip wasn't just about riding. I wanted to enjoy the places that was going through. So when I felt like stopping for a while, that was fine with me. I stayed about a week in El Chalten. I just really liked that place and the people I met there. So it was such a beautiful area.
Where did you stay there? Did you manage to find a local to stay with?
So in Perito Moreno, I stayed at a campground that was in the little town that's not too far. I did get invited at a restaurant. This one person met me and he was like so excited about my trip that he was like, you can come to my restaurant and I'll feed you. Come as many times as you want. And I was still super shy to go there and be fed, but and he has like this really fancy restaurant. And then in El Chalten, I had no plans, but when I arrived, I met people who were like, oh, like we're staying at this person's place. She's the Casa de Ciclistas local, like so the house of cyclists in El Chalten. And she knows about you and you should go there. And I was still really shy. All along the trip, I didn't really want to impose myself. Like I really want to make sure that if people were inviting me, they wanted to. Like I didn't want to ask for people to invite me. I felt like I'm privileged to be able to travel. I don't want to put people in position where they feel they have to invite me. If they're interested, and that's great, I would love to stay at their place. But I feel like I'm pretty lucky and I don't want to necessarily ask for people to do this for me. But anyway, so I still went, even though I was shy. And of course, they were, not of course, but they were really happy to see me, which was good. And I stayed there for a while. But also, because I went on several hikes from El Chalten of a few days. And part of it was like I didn't want to impose myself for a whole week to this lovely people who were inviting me. So on purpose, I went for a few hikes where I'd stay several days up in the mountains and then come back.
The Casa de Ciclistas, how many are there?
I don't know, and I didn't do a lot of research. I did not know a lot about them. Some of them, I think maybe the blogger had talked about them, so I knew and looked for them. I think total on my trip, I stayed at 3 of them. One at the really beginning in Tolwyn. It's pretty famous. It's like somebody who has like a bakery and lets lots of people stay at his place. And then I think there was the one in El Chalten, and that one was pretty recent. Like I think she had started not long before, so it wasn't really, really known. People stayed at her place, so some people knew, but I didn't know about it. And then I went to the one of Jorge. I can't remember what city it is, but maybe some of it sometimes is into the warm shower. So the warm shower is this network of cyclists who offer to people to stay at their place. They expect you to be cycling and travel by bike, and they let you stay at their place, either camp in their yard or stay inside and take a warm shower. The whole idea is also to be able to chat about your cycling trips. So I heard about it only just like a week or two before I left on my trip. I didn't really know before then. I did use it, but not a lot. I find that sometimes it was hard for me. It was too hard for me to plan. It was a little stressful to be able to say, oh, I'll arrive this day, and then tell them, oh, actually not, and then trying to find a way to contact them. And so I would only do it when it seemed to be really, really worth it. Most of the way I was staying at places is like by word of mouth, like other cyclists that would meet, sometimes going the other direction, were telling me, oh, like you need to stay there. We'll tell our friend. And sometimes before I'd arrive somewhere, they knew because cyclists who were passing me were going faster. And so before I would arrive to a village, people were like, oh, there's a unicyclist coming, and oh, here she is. And so it was pretty interesting. There was even like a rumor at one point that I was hearing when I'd go somewhere, and they were like, oh, oh, apparently there's another unicyclist who is riding from Canada. And so I was like, I think it's actually me. And I'm not riding from Canada, but from UShuaia. But I live in Canada. And so, because I don't think there was another unicyclist on the same route at the same time as me. But it was interesting, like little rumors that you'd hear along the way. And so, for example, Jorge, who has Casa de Ciclista, knew I was coming. I don't remember if I told him in advance. Maybe I think it might have been just a friend who was on a bike and told him before I arrived. Maybe we were supposed to meet there. Anyway, he actually came to meet me on the route. He was driving. I mean, he's an avid cyclist, but I guess for work he was on in his car, and he drove to me, and I think he brought me some little snacks and welcomed me in advance before I finally got to his place. I think he was like just so excited to see me. This was the great thing about the unicycle, is that I think a lot of people are really used to see cyclists, and this was something new, and people were super happy to see me. Were excited, and I didn't have to be the one starting the conversation, or I didn't feel like I was asking something from them. They were the one coming to me, and that's kind of why I really enjoyed doing it by unicycle, even though in a way it doesn't really make sense. It's much harder than riding a bike. It's much harder because all the weight of the gear is kind of on you, and it's pretty slow. And so in terms of the riding experience, it's not better than a bike, but that's what I've been doing for a really long time. I still enjoy riding my unicycle, but I also really enjoy the reaction that people have when I ride, and the fact that, yeah, people would really want to talk to me and meet me or invite me to their place.
Let's talk about the Carretera Austral and got on that. Did you ride that all the way up to Puerto Montt?
Yeah, so I didn't go all the way to Puerto Montt. I decided to cross back to Argentina. There are a few cities I wanted to go to in Argentina that seemed pretty nice. El Bolson is known as a bit like the hippie town of Argentina. I was curious about that place, though it was the end of the season, not really the best time to go there. To be honest, I actually didn't really like the Carretera Austral because it's a lot of gravel road. The riding wasn't that nice, and also the way they built the Carretera Austral is that it's the mountains, and they're just like, from what I've heard, they just bombed just to trace that route. And so I felt a bit oppressed because you're really in between two really high kind of like cliffs on each side. It's really, really green. And so I know a bunch of cyclists that I met like really liked it. But for me, coming from Vancouver, I felt I didn't really need that much green. Like I have that at home. And it was raining a lot also there. And so that wasn't my favorite. I liked more space. I felt my mind could wander more when I had space around me. And here I felt a bit oppressed. So I diverted and didn't go all the way to Puerto Montt. I still met really nice people along the way, but I just remember being hard. Yeah.
What do you do when dogs chase after you? What's your method to deal with that?
When there's only one, I can deal with it. Yeah, I was really scared of dogs. I'm not, it's always been a problem for me. At first, I had brought this little system that was maybe going to help, that was supposed to be like ultrasound in their ears, but it wasn't really working. I considered bringing pepper spray, but I didn't really want to do that to them. I'm like, I don't like them, but or it's not that I don't like dogs, but I don't like them when they go after me. And so at one point, I found this technique where I would kind of like almost throw my unicycle at them, not to hit them, but to scare them. And it actually worked really well, but would only work if there was only one dog. I remember this one time when there was like 5 or 6 dogs running after me, and I was just really, really scared. It was in a farm or close to a farm, and I think in the end the owner maybe got them to go back home. But yeah, I had this technique where I would kind of like jump off my unicycle while kind of throwing my unicycle towards them. Though sometimes it would damage a bit the gear that I had on my unicycle. So not necessarily the best technique, but it worked when there was only one dog. I think I was lucky that I never had a bad encounter with a dog. From what I heard, some other countries in South America can be way worse. I didn't go all the way to Peru or something like that, so that was probably a good thing.
Well, what proved to be the most challenging part of the adventure for you? Was it the wind? Because you mentioned the wind a lot, but we haven't talked about wind yet.
For sure, the wind was really a problem. I knew it would be. I had heard from friends. So I also had other friends who did the trip on bikes. And so I talked to them quite a bit, and they were saying, oh, like often the wind starts in the morning, it stops, or it's okay in the morning, and then it starts, and then in the evening again. So I thought that'd be fine. I'll ride, and then I'll have a long nap, and then I'll ride again. But then it didn't happen. In the early days of my trip, it was just nonstop. And then I started to be really scared because I was like, I can't do anything. I can barely walk with my unicycle. So I didn't know what to do. I got really scared that I was going the wrong direction. Like the winds are mostly north to south, and I was going the opposite way. So I just wasn't sure what to do. I started to look way more closely at the weather forecast, trying to find internet whenever I could to have an idea of exactly when I would be able to keep going or not. But for a moment, I wondered if my trip even made sense, or if I should like take a bus, go up to Santiago de Chile and just go the other direction. But I knew that it meant I would arrive in winter in the south, and then that meant a lot of snow, and that would be another challenge. So I was just really confused and not sure what I should do. But by waiting a few days and looking way more at the wind forecast, it ended up being okay, and I kept going.
What was your favorite part of the adventure?
I'd say again, I really like the area around El Chalten and the people I met there. And I'm going on hikes, actually. I'm on a unicycle route, but I really enjoyed the hikes. It's also an area where I met gauchos that invited me at their place. And in a way, I was maybe surprised how people were welcoming, even though it's a really touristy area. And I was worried that maybe they'd be kind of had to deal with too many tourists, but they were still super nice. Yeah, I guess I'm more talking about an area than like something of the adventure that I like. But yeah, again, for me, it's a lot about the people I meet. That's important about my trips. That's more than the riding itself. Though I did really like to have a lot of time to think and just have like my mind wander during the day. I don't really, it's a bit far now. I mean, it was in 2013, so I don't really remember precisely what was going through my mind at the time, but I think I needed that time for myself. We have like really busy lives. It's hard to make the space for that, so it was just really good.
Well, let's talk about this Chris Holm Evolution of Balance Award. Tell me about that, and what did it mean to you to win that award?
So Chris Holm is a really famous unicyclist, one of the most famous. I know a lot of unicyclists who started riding because of him. And he has a brand of unicycles, and he wants to encourage people to go on adventures. And so he created this award with a friend of his. For my trip in Patagonia, I in the end decided not to try to get sponsorship. Part of it was to keep my freedom and also not necessarily like represent a brand, and I wasn't necessarily comfortable with that. but I know Chrysom pretty well, and I really like his values. So I decided that I still wanted to apply for this new trip that I was doing in the Alps. Part of it is because financially I did need the help a bit. I thought it would really make a difference. And also, part of it was, I also wanted a bit of the recognition of maybe what I have been doing, and wanted to promote mountain unicycling through women. There's certainly less women who go on trip like this, less women that ride mountain unicycles. I'd say, I mean, it's changing, and there's a bunch of young women that are doing some cool, like they're certainly more skilled than me now. I'm also getting a bit more scared to hurt myself and things like that. So my thing is more on like the trip I'm doing than the riding itself. But I do want to encourage more people to do the same thing. So if they hear about the type of trip, they can see the potential in what they can do.
Do you have a book that you like to recommend to people?
There's maybe one that has been translated. It's called The Consolation of the Forest, Alone in a Cabin on the Siberian Taiga, from Sylvain Tesson. And so he spent 6 months, I think, on the, I guess it's the Baikal Lake. Sorry,
I think I know what you're talking about. I think I actually saw a YouTube video about it. There's a French guy he was alone in some cabin off Lakebaikal in Russia.
Yes, exactly. Apparently, it looks like he did a documentary, so you might have seen some images. I haven't seen it. I just read the book. I quite enjoyed it. I appreciate like the people that are able to live off the land or simply, and it's always an inspiration when we're more and more remote from that in our busy city life, or at least my busy city life. It's not a book about the travel itself. It's the book about once he reached this point and stay there. And I quite enjoyed it. I read it a while ago, so I don't remember the details though. Another one that I quite like would be Tracks. I mean, it's a pretty classic, known book. So most people would probably have read it already, but I quite enjoyed it too.
Well, while we're on the subject of books, before we end this episode, I want to take this opportunity to connect another podcast that I did, and that's with Tim Moss. And when I looked through your Instagram, I saw that you had designed the cover for his book, With the Sun on Our Right. How did that collaboration come about between you and Tim?
Oh, that's a good question. So what happened is that I follow him and I guess a number of British adventurers, because during my trip in Patagonia, I ended up spending a number of days with Jill, a cyclist that was on the same route as me. And I guess I was slower than her, but she would maybe spend a few more days in a city than me. And so we ended up riding quite a bit together. And through her, I got to connect with a number of British adventurers. And so I was following Tim on Twitter, I think, and he was trying to design the cover of his book himself and asking which one we'd prefer. And so I offered to do it for him if he were interested. And he was. I showed him a few options, and he was still interested. So we ended up working on and for me it was a great experience. That's kind of what I want to do. Is I'd like to work in publishing in the world of like adventures and outdoors. So it was just a good opportunity.
Well, Anne-Sophie, where will your interests take you next?
That's the good question. I'm not sure yet. I mean, now that we have a little one, it's probably we'll have to include her. So there are a few options. It might be a sailing trip. We do have a sailboat. I live on a float house in Vancouver, and right next to our float house we do have a sailboat. So that might be it. That would be one of the easier solution with her. In 2018, with my husband, we went from Lyon in France to Tehran in Iran on a solar tandem trike. It was a weird contraption, as in one of the person was rowing and the other one was pedaling. And there is a bit of room in between the two seats. So we're thinking that we could maybe have our daughter in between us and go on our next trip with her. So that would be another option. Or we do have a rowboat, and we've been hoping to go on like few days trips, and we haven't done as much as we wanted with this rowboat, and we're hoping to do more. We really enjoy using our rowboat. We go a little bit around our house with our daughter. I'm not too sure about going in rougher waters with her, but we'll see how things go.
Are you going to write about that tandem trike trip from Lyon, France to Tehran? That sounds very interesting. You should put that on your website.
Yeah, I need to add a few things about it. Not necessarily write much about it, but at least explain what we did. And mostly we have actually a good movie that it was presented at the Vancouver Mountain Film Festival in February. It's available now on YouTube. We decided, given the situation and the difficulties to go to festival and things, it's now available on YouTube. So I should absolutely link it on my website.
How do we find it on YouTube? What's the search terms?
It's called 3 Wheels Under the Sun.
Okay. Anne-Sophie, how can people contact you or find you online if they want to learn more?
Yeah, I think the easiest would be through my website, also my Instagram and my Facebook that are linked on that website. So AnneSophie.com would be the easiest.
Anne-Sophie Rodet, thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing the story of unicycling through Patagonia. Best of luck on your future adventures.
Thank you so much. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you again for listening. This episode was recorded on May 19th, 2020. You can send me feedback at paul@thepursuitzone.com. You can also leave me a voice message by going to speakpipe.com/thepursuitzone. The best way to support the podcast is to subscribe and share it with your friends. For the subscription links, show notes, and more, visit thepursuitzone.com.